Hello, dear listeners. This is John Consemulder for Healing Sound Movement Radio. You've already heard a little bit of an introduction from my side, so you already know that I have a special guest and a special radio show this evening because I have David Icke on the other end of the line. Is that correct, David? I'd like to
Yes, John. Yeah, nice to be here, mate.
Welcome to this show. I think it would be good to make a little bit of an ironic intro, but I think you will like it because we can start off at some important essential things you are talking about and writing about. But first, let's not forget you are in Holland, in Amsterdam, the Rij, at the 27th this month, 27th of November. And please, people, go to www.purityevents.nl, and our radio website is www.healingsoundmovement.com, and our other website is worldpeacechild.com. And go to purityevents.nl if there's still a ticket available, but I believe it's already sold out, which is not a strange coincidence because last year, I believe, David, you were talking to about 1,200 people. I believe there's room for 800 now maximum. So that's quite logical that that's the case. But my intro will be this. My first question to you, David, would have to be, is this really David Icke I'm now talking to? I have read somewhere that you are not who you say you are, that you are not David Icke. And if you are David Icke for real, are you the one that went out of his mind and into his consciousness? And if so, let's talk about infinite consciousness and the mind, please. If you're not a programmed illusion, this is. I'm kidding here, of course, but this is your work. You're talking about infinite consciousness and the programming of code, so to speak, to create a holographic illusion. So I like to talk about that. Let's talk about infinite consciousness and the mind, as you write about in your latest book, Human Race, Get Off Your Knees, The Lion Sleeps No More.
Yeah, John. I guess it is me in this sense. What I'm saying when I say I'm not David Icke is this, that what we all are, not just me, is consciousness, awareness. I like the term awareness because when I read, and I have in great amounts, the various experiences of near-death experiences, they talk about leaving the body and their sense of reality suddenly changes. It becomes massively more expanded. They are able to perceive realities at the same, quote, time. In fact, they talk about the fact that out of the body there is no time. They're not feeling emotional in the same sense. And there are many, many different dramatic changes that take place when they leave the body. And so when I say, who am I? Well, I am awareness. And then the question comes, how aware is that awareness? Because there is this infinite awareness, infinite consciousness, as I call it, but not all of that consciousness is at the same level of awareness all the time. And so you can have some experiences where you think you are a human being in a body called Charlie Smith or Ethel Jones, and when you look in the mirror, what you see is what you are. And what I'm saying is that's not who we are. David Icke is not who I am. It's what I am experiencing, what my awareness is experiencing, and we give that a name, David Icke or John or whatever. The point of this conspiracy that of subjugating humanity that I've been talking about for 2 decades now and writing about is the conspiracy at its foundation level to manipulate our sense of identity, our self-identity, so that we identify who we are and therefore the limits of our potential, the limits of our perception with the vehicle, with the body, and the name and the job and the nation we're born into, rather than being infinite awareness, having that experience. There's nothing wrong with saying, yeah, I'm from Amsterdam, I'm Dutch, or I'm from London, I'm English, and all that stuff. But as long as we understand that that's an experience, it's not who we are. We can play with the game. We can play with the reality we're experiencing and interact with it without getting caught in it and totally absorbed in it, so that we are in the world quote, physically, that's an illusion too, but also in the world in terms of the point from which we're observing the world. And of course, we need the five senses because that is, if you like, that level which locks into this reality. It connects us into it, so we interact with it. Same with the left side of the brain. But if we identify self only with that, then we're identifying with extraordinary levels of limitation of I can't or it's not possible. When actually it's all possible if we realize the nature of who we really are. So the distinction I'm making, as you said in your introduction there, and it's all about words. I mean, and you know, I use this word for that, I use that word for this, but I see a distinction between what I call mind or mind-body and consciousness, infinite consciousness, awareness. The mind-body is like, on a much more advanced level, is like the computer sitting in front of me now. I'm sitting at a desk with a computer in front of me talking to you, and the computer is like the body-mind. It allows me to go on to the internet, the World Wide Web, this collective reality. And if there was wireless internet in this room, I look around and I can't see the wireless internet. It's in the unseen from the point of view of what my senses can decode. But if I then tune this computer to that wireless, unseen collective reality we call the World Wide Web, then suddenly on the screen in front of me would come a reality that can be picked up by, and experienced at the same time by people in Australia, London, America, South Africa, wherever. And if we think about it, we say I'm going on the internet, but we don't. The computer does. We observe the internet through the computer and interact with the internet via the computer. Now, if I was sitting here, John, and I suddenly had this perception that I was the computer, now suddenly I am subject to the limitations of the perceptions of the computer and what the computer can decode. Now I'm really I am now on the internet, but I'm full of limitations. Now, this is what I'm suggesting is happening daily through our lives, by the hour, by the minute, as we are manipulated through the education system, the mainstream media, peer pressure and parent pressure from people who've been through the same system and been programmed their perception in the same way. We're being manipulated to identify symbolically in what I'm talking about with the computer instead of being the person sitting at the desk having control of the computer. And so if you said to people, who are you? They'd say, well, this is my name, this is my job, this is where I live, this is where I come from, these are my emotional states, this is what I like, this is what I'd like to do. But that's really the experience they're describing it. They're not describing them. And what I'm working very hard to get across, not to convince people and say, you know, I must try to convince you that I'm right, but to give people the opportunity through information to see that there are other ways of looking at reality. And the plain fact is that if people were in a conscious state in terms of their true infinite awareness, and we're observing this reality in their lives and the world and world events from the perspective of being in the world, but not from the level of perception in the end being of it, looking into it from another greater expanded state of awareness, which we can, whenever we choose, then it would be impossible for a network of stunningly few families at the peak of the pyramid to manipulate world events and therefore people's everyday lives and choices and thoughts and perceptions and desires in the way that they do. And that's why for the few to control the many, the few have to get the many to self-identify with the body-mind, therefore fundamental limitation.
I could say the world has been put upside down and we have to reverse it again in the state it was and change our perception, because if we change the perception, we have a different view on reality. And if you have a different view on reality, then at least we can change the world the way it has been manipulated. We can reverse that again. Two things came to mind while I was listening to your explanation. One is I've been interviewing, a lot of people, but also James Hurtak, and he wrote one book with Russell Targ, the famous parapsychologist who also worked with Uri Geller, I believe, who I also had on my show. But Russell Targ wrote one sentence which I think is interesting here. The book is called The End of Suffering, and it was about the cause of suffering, and almost Tibetan Buddhism came up here. But he says, give up the story of who you think you are. And I think that's interesting because it sounded exactly the way you just described our illusion and how the mind-body works, and that it's all, and that's the second thing I want to say, that it's all actually coding and decoding information of higher bandwidth, which actually create reality, but people still think reality is real because we create it, but in a way it's only real because the hologram allows it, right? Interference patterns of sounds and waves and light. But what I think is interesting in your book, and I want to go into that aspect as well, I wrote in my book Blueprint about the real reality. I call it the real reality of sound, light, and energy connected to non-local and infinite consciousness. So we have a lot of resonance here. But I thought it was fascinating that in your book I wrote somewhere that, let's call it the voice, you know what I mean, your guidance, so to speak, said to you that if it vibrates, if it moves, it's illusion. I thought that was fascinating. So even on the blueprint level, there's still one more master hologram. I believe you call it the metaphysical universe, which is the real reality underlying that aspect, right?
Yeah, well, there's a number of things there. Interesting. On the last point, what I'm saying is that the base reality of this universe is waveform. And what we're doing is decoding information at the waveform level of reality, which is the basis of this reality, this universe, through the electrical into the digital and holographic. But the base of it all is information in the waveform level, because, if you you look at holograms and the way holograms are made in our world, they create an interference pattern by putting part of a laser straight onto a photographic print, basically, and then the other part of the laser interacts with the subject being photographed, and then that part of the laser collides, carrying that vibrational information of the subject, then collides with the other part of the laser, and they create an interference pattern. It's like dropping two pebbles in a pond, and the waves go out and collide with each other. Well, that's a waveform expression in the pond, a waveform information telling you where the pebbles dropped, how far apart, at what speed, and all the rest of it. Now, what they then do with holograms, they have the holographic print, which looks, and not by coincidence either, very much like a fingerprint. And it seems to be nothing. It seems to be random. It's just wavy lines. But then you put the laser upon the interference pattern, and apparently miraculously, an apparently three-dimensional, and the best of them, apparently solid object appears before you. Now, scientists have, I understand, pondered for years over in quantum physics, etc., over the apparent bewildering mystery that particles take a waveform and waveform take a particle form at the same time. And they think, well, how can something be a particle and a wave at the same time? Well, okay, let's go back to the hologram. You fire the laser at the interference pattern, and the holographic three-dimensional object appears. Now, what that three-dimensional object is a holographic expression of the information contained in the waveform pattern on the photographic print. So you take the waveform information away, and you take away the holographic information, the holographic expression of that information. So not only, if you like, do particles take a waveform and a waveform take a particle form at the same time, they have to, because that's the way it works. If they didn't, then this reality wouldn't be what how we kind of perceive it. But beyond this waveform information, like the wireless internet, if you like, it is, I would say, the true us, and that's silence. That's silent all possibility, stillness, silence. When I went into that altered state, massively altered state of awareness, when I, for the only time in my life, took psychoactive drugs in 2008 in a rainforest in Brazil, the ayahuasca experience you mentioned, it was clear from what this voice, took a female expression, but that was just how I decoded it. Took a female expression, this voice, as loud as mine is now, said to me, as you pointed out earlier, if it vibrates, it's illusion. Now, you can start to understand how profound that was, especially as the years have gone on, and I've understood more and more about all this. First of all, I went into a state in that ayahuasca experience where I entered a place of silence and stillness. And of course, when people meditate, deeply meditate, what do they tell you? They say, I go into the silent, still place where there is no time and all that stuff. When I was talking to Credo Mutwa, the Zulu shaman, on one occasion, when he was doing Throwing the Bones, which is their version of the tarot cards or the rune stones, and I explained to me, I said, explain to me what's happening when you're throwing the bones and when you're saying what they mean. And he said, I go into my silent cave where past, present, and future all connect. So this silence, this stillness, is the key. This is the core of us, because that is all possibility. You know, people, they perceive silence as nothing. You know, you hear silence and you say, what did you hear? And they say nothing. But actually within that silence is everything, because it's all possibility. And so when you've got silence and then you start talking, what I'm doing with my words, my vibration that words are, I am pulling one possibility or a few possibilities out of all possibility. And then when I stop talking, they go back into all possibility, which is the silence and the stillness. So when people talk about apparent paradoxes like everywhere and nowhere, everything and nothing, then they say, well, you can't have everything and nothing. Well, you can within all possibility. You have to, or it's not all possibility. You can't have everywhere and nowhere. Yes, you can, and you have to if it's within all possibility. So these worlds of vibration are the created, if you like, almost like incredibly advanced computer games where we can interact with experience and play with it. And you know, it's going back to an earlier point you made about the end of suffering, give up the story. Mm-hmm. It's when we get caught in the story, we get caught. It's like me sitting here, John, and putting not that I do, I can't stand them personally, but putting a computer game disc in the computer, and I'm playing it, and as I'm playing it, I think it's real. And you know, going back to what I said earlier about the mind body, as I call it, being the interface between awareness, infinite awareness, and this reality. And if you get caught, therefore, identifying or observing life from purely mind body level, you become the computer. So if I'm playing a computer game here and I start to move in the wider sense of reality into body mind, then I enter the computer. So I become the game. And so what's happening in the game becomes me and everything about me. What I'm doing in the game becomes me and everything about me, and what I'm experiencing the same. Whereas if you hold this awareness that you are infinite awareness, having the experience in the game, then that experience, as we go through life and all the interactions that we have and the ups and downs that we have as we perceive them, they are not the extreme of experience that they would otherwise be, because you realize that no matter what happens in this tiny little experience we call a so-called physical life, we're always infinite awareness. And when we withdraw from the vehicle of what we call death, with no such thing, it's just moving your point of observation, then that's going to happen anyway. And also because we're within all possibility and we have the ability to manifest out of all possibility, then whatever we're experiencing at the moment is not forever. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter if it's a relationship or whether it's an experience, nice or not so nice. It's not forever, because we're just part of a massive kind of game of experience. And the other great thing that these if you like, worlds of form do, it allows states of awareness of very, very different levels of perception, which in vibrational terms outside of these worlds of form would not vibrationally connect, to actually, through the bodies, which are the computers, which are all resonating within the frequency of this reality. It means that we can experience a world in which dramatically different levels of awareness are interacting with each other, which makes it fascinating and a place of great interest and great experience in many, many ways. But if we hold that perception, it's an experience. You know, it's like, oh God, my life is over because this is all happened to me now. Well, you go, well, hold on a second. You can see it like that. If you perceive that you're in the game and of the game, yes, I understand why it seems that your life's over, or this emotional blow you can't recover from it. But if you draw back and you say it's an experience, okay, take the best from the experience, leave the rest, move on. It's not. Don't say it makes it easy to overcome some of these great challenges we have, but it makes it easier. And the more you identify with infinite awareness instead of body mind, the easier it gets. Things that would tear you up emotionally or get you angry and upset and frustrated and furious don't have the same power over you the more you move out of self-identifying with body mind and start to identify with the infinite level of awareness. And the other point you made, just very briefly, quite right, the coded, decoded information. What we're dealing with in these realities is information, decoding information. It depends what is encoded and what is encoded to be a decoder. For instance, if I put a computer disk in this tower here, that is information on a disk, and the computer then decodes that information onto the screen. Now, what is a computer? It's information. It's encoded to read other information, and that's what our reality is like. These body-mind computer systems, as I call them, biological computer systems. They are information encoded to decode other information, and not only are we taking information from this reality, like we go on the internet and we take information from the collective reality we call the internet, we are also putting our spin, our perceptions onto or into this reality, in the same way that you can get information from the internet, but you can also post information on the internet, which changes to a larger or lesser extent the perception of the internet. So it's an interactive computer game, and if we change the point from which we observe it, then our lives change. And this is why this information, I think, is so important to get people out of the box that the sense of I am Charlie Smith and Ethel Jones puts us in.
Now, David, a few things pop up in my mind right now. I'm getting enthusiastic here. One is where you were talking about where we have all these infinite possibilities. Of course, this reminds me of like a quantum super collision state, which, and I believe they call it the collapse of the wave factor, when you observe or measure in quantum physics and quantum mechanics, then a certain outcome, like the Heisenberg principle, the uncertainty principle, then you pick one, you select one, and that's the one. Well, in this case, your consciousness, your infinite consciousness, gets reselected, and you consciously pick one card out of the billions of possibilities. And
That's an interesting point, John.
The collapse of the wave factor. That's how they call it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I'll talk about that in relation to what you just talked about in a second. But it's more and more obvious to me that what happens when we enter this reality is we do, in a way, collapse a waveform, and how we do it, and in relation of our version of time when we do it, is fundamentally important to expressing that in what we call our lives. Absolutely. Because astrology and the planets. What are the planets? Okay, we look at the planets and we see physical spheres spinning and all the rest of it, most of them. And then we ask, but hold on a second, the base reality of this reality is the information waveform level. So the base base construct of those planets is actually waveform, like everything else. And so what we're looking at when we see planets moving around is we're seeing information moving around. And so there is an information construct that is constantly, on the level of the planetary movements alone, constantly changing. So if we come into this reality, what we call birth, at a certain time, we're going to pick up that information construct at the point where we come in, and therefore we're going to pick up the perceptions. We're going to pick up some of the behavior traits, within which there's a lot of choice, by the way, of whether we go to the higher level of that or the lower level of that. I know people who've been born on the same day and pretty close to each other who are very different characters. Although they're the same in many ways, some have picked the lower level and some have picked the higher level of possibility, and the way their lives have played out have been very different, even though that they've come in at the same in the same period with the same information. But basically, what we're doing once we've taken on that information and the gifts and kind of aptitudes that we pick up also, is that we then start to interact with the changing reality through our lives in a different way to someone who comes in and picks up a different information construct at that time. So I think it's an important point to make. You know, I keep saying, emphasizing all the time, wherever you're looking at holographically, apparently physically, take it back to the waveform level, because that's its base construct, and that's what you're really looking at. So look at that, and then you'll see why numerology works, why astrology works when it's done properly. The other point you make there is about observing. And you know, as you well know, scientists, some of them anyway, over the years have said that they reckon that this reality only exists in the way that we perceive it when it's observed. And that's absolutely right, I should say, because the spin on reality that we're talking about kind of definitely goes along that road. Because if I put, again, the disk in the tower here, and I start link the computer to it, then it starts to take that information in waveform and it puts it on the screen as pictures, graphics, colors, text, all that stuff. But what's on the screen at any one point is only that part of the disk information waveform that's being read at the time. All the other stuff remains in waveform state, and only when it is read does it go on the screen. And I would strongly suggest that's what happens. That actually, when this reality is not being observed, read, consciously read, then it's in its waveform state.
Interesting, because I'm seeing a division here between consciousness and matter, and not a division between consciousness and matter per se, but at a deeper level. And allow me to explain, because I think the conscious side of this has a deeper level, because that's one point I want to make. You have a fascinating evolutionary or revolutionary perspective on NDE, near-death experience, and reincarnation and karma, basically saying, well, you think you get back to the source. Well, wrong. It's just another conditioned illusion, a very persistent one, which you take along with you, as if it's just one life, but then you collect it from all other lives. That's one. And the other has to do with matter, so the programming of matter, so to speak, at a deeper level. Because I've asked this question to Erwin Laszlo as well, talking about the holographic plate we talked about there. And your work is so important because you show that change comes actually from here, not the holographic illusion we think and we believe is reality, but the underlying metaphysical universe. So my question about that, who and where is the metaphysical universe video projector if our physical world, let's call it this way, is the movie screen? Because that's what you're saying. So this is very deep stuff, of course, but if there's a master hologram, let's put it this way, the metaphysical universe, even on a deeper level than matter and even vibration be an illusion. So who and where is this metaphysical universe video projector if our physical world is the movie screen? I think it has something to do with the moon, right?
Well, to an extent. See, the metaphysical universe, as I call it, a name used by a great friend of mine who I met years ago now in South Africa. We used to talk about the metaphysical universe. It is vibration. It's waveform. It's vibrating. That's the base form of this reality. It's not the base form of infinite consciousness, which in its true all possibility state is silent, still, all knowing, everything that is, has been, ever can be, all possibility.
0 point? Is that the same? 0 point?
Well. People use these terms, but I guess they're talking about something similar. But the thing is that all these apparent airy-fairy, oh come on, what you're talking about stuff starts to make sense, John, when you start to realize that the basis of all reality, whether it's in form or out of form, is the still silent all possibility. Because when then people talk about the infinite that is all that is, can be, and ever will be, what are they describing in those terms? All possibility. That's what they're describing. And then we pull these different possibilities we call worlds of form, etc., out of this all possibility. And then at some point, when we're bored with them or whatever, they go back. But we are always infinite awareness in different states of perception. But in terms of this whole projection, it's the similar principle, like I say, to the wireless internet. Who created the wireless internet? Who created the World Wide Web? It's some level of awareness has decided to create this world. And it's an interactive, extraordinarily advanced version of a computer game. But what I'm saying in terms of the moon, and I'm going to talk about this in Amsterdam soon, and I talk about it in the new book, You Must Get Off Your Knees. And more stuff along these lines is emerging all the time, and the Saturn keeps coming up as well in relation to this. But certainly on one level, it's very clear to me from the synchronicity of information that's been coming to me, and that's how I've gleaned this information over the last 20 years. It's this extraordinary sequence where a new subject will come into my life, and from the moment it appears, information about that subject from goodness knows how many different directions, levels, people, sources, starts hitting me about this subject. And when I was writing Human Race Get Off Your Knees, I guess it was about a year ago now, I sat down in this very chair I'm talking to you from one morning, and or I felt the energy in the room change, and I thought, here we go. I'm totally aware of this because it's happened to me so many times. And when the energy in the room changed, I got very powerfully passed through my mind, the moon's not what you think it is. The moon's not, quote, real in the way that you think it is. And I didn't dismiss it because I've been through this process so many times in relation to so many subjects. So I thought, okay, let's see what we do, what we get here. So I went onto a search engine and I just put in words to the effect of the moon's not real and it's some kind of construct. And up came a book, which I had not heard of up to that point, a very, very good book I found, called Who Built the Moon, by a couple of researchers and writers who've written other books, which was pointing out the anomalies of the moon and how it all pointed to the fact that it wasn't actually a heavenly body, which had, quote, occurred naturally, but was some kind of construct, maybe an entire construct, maybe a hollowed out planetoid. But it wasn't what we thought it was. And so from that moment, the information just kept coming to me in various ways. And I realized that two scientists from the the Soviet Academy of Sciences in the 1970s, I think about 1970, had written a long article in a Russian magazine called Sputnik, in which they were posturing exactly the same thing, that the moon was not real, was some kind of gigantic spaceship or spacecraft. And then there was a book written in the 70s. I came across that, The Mysterious Spaceship Moon, and all that stuff in there was right in line with this. The moon's not real. The moon's not what you think it is. And so it went on. And what then starts to happen is what appears at first to be the moon's not what, it becomes a piece that starts to explain things that were not easily explainable before. And so it's a funny thing, you know, we're born into the world and we tend to accept the world as it is when we're born. And this is a reason, for instance, why the generations today that have experienced the world before this great blatant police state car started coming in, all the surveillance and all the control and cameras everywhere and cameras in schools and everything, are very important because they still have the ability to see how it was and have a comparison to what it's become. Young people now being born into this world are born into a world already massively under surveillance. And what people tend to, not all of them by any means, but what most people tend to think is, well, this is how the world is, because this is the one they've been born into. It's the only one they've known. And it's the same with things like the moon. You look at the moon, and you see it going through its cycles, and it's a full moon tonight. Oh, it's a new moon tonight. And you accept it because, well, it's there. It's always been there. Well, it's the moon, mate, isn't it? But then when you start asking questions about it, as I did after this situation started that I described, you realize they're just extraordinary anomalies to the moon. It shouldn't be there. It's far too big.
And you talk about these mysteries in your book because I thought it was fascinating. Before people think, did he come up with this construct? A lot of people and scientists and also the writers you just mentioned, Christopher Knight and Alan Butler, who built the moon. So right. There's a lot of mystery and controversy relating to the moon, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And as one scientist said, the only thing you can really say about the moon is its observational error. It doesn't exist because it shouldn't be there. I mean, it's bigger than Pluto, John. It's going round not far out in universe terms from this planet. I mean, this planet should never have a satellite like that. Anyway, what then went on to, you know, I do it, as you say, write about it in detail in the book, and I'll be talking about it at some considerable length in Amsterdam. But then a series of other synchronistic things started happening to me, which were pushing me very clearly in a direction that took it on from the fact that the moon's actually not what we think it is, to the fact that the moon is broadcasting something, and it is affecting our reality and the breadth of reality that we can decode, that we can perceive. And I liken it because I think it's a perfect analogy to what happens in China when vast amounts of the internet that is open to us is not able to be accessed by Chinese people because the Chinese authorities have firewalled off the computer system so it cannot pick up vast chunks of the internet because they don't want people to see that because it would affect their perceptions of self in the world. And something like that is being done upon us. I call it the moon matrix. And it's like a hack. You know, we've got this reality we call the universe, or at least this frequency range of the universe that we're able to perceive. There's much more to the universe, fantastically more to the universe than ever we can perceive through the five senses decoding system. That's there. It's not malevolent. It's not a bad thing. It's something's been constructed as a place of very interesting experience. But what's happened, I'm suggesting, people must look at the information and make their own mind up, is that if you like, base construct of the universe has been hacked, so that and I think that the constant references in ancient accounts and legends of a genetic manipulation of humanity by a non-human force, what they perceived as the gods, was part of disconnecting us from this wider perception of the universe and locking us into this hack, this firewalled off part of the universe that we perceive as the world in our lives. And not totally, not in every way, certainly not, but for sure, the fact that they found 95% or something of DNA, don't know what it does, they call it junk DNA as a result. Part of that is because in some way we are not any longer using the full potential of this body computer receiver transmitter than we were before the hack and the genetic manipulation. And I think it's also connected, though again not totally, there are other reasons for it, that I mean, crikey, how much of our brains do we apparently not use and not kind of exploit their potential? And I think all these things are connected to the fact that we've been disconnected like a computer in China from being able to perceive, access, and therefore get awareness of ourself and the world from vast chunks of what we used to decode before as what we call a human race. Because it seems to me that this constant theme you find around the world, most notably, of course, most famously, not most notably in the Bible, of the fall of man, it's all related to this hack, this dramatic suppression.
Should we call it not the original sin, but the original hack?
Yeah, it's the hack. And you know, in many ways, you know, you look at sin. Well, sin was a moon god. Sin was the moon god in Arabia, and through various changes became known as Allah. As I talk about in Human Race Get Off Your Knees. So that kind of fits exactly that sin is the moon god. Now, what is sin? Original sin, being born with original sin. I think if you really played this back to its true origin, John, I think you'd find that original sin means original genetic manipulation by the people in the moon.
I'm thinking, I wrote a few words down while you were talking, David. Window of perception. We literally have a limited bandwidth window of perception.
Absolutely.
And I wrote down frequency gating hijacking. That's what it is. It's frequency gating, right?
Yeah, it's like firewalling off a computer, so that there are dramatic limits in what it can decode and therefore put on the screen. And I'm saying that the human form has been manipulated, the human body computer has been manipulated in the same way to dramatically limit what we can put on our screen, which is visual perception and other perceptions that relate to the five senses.
Now, talking about those limits, David, I want to go into this because I think it's fascinating for the general listeners, because, of course, we do not know for sure who's listening. It might be an experienced listener or a reader or someone who doesn't have a clue who David Icke is. Then he should have, because...
That's the best they do have. No clue.
Well, that's good. Most experts don't have a clue. That's good. But you're talking about, in Tales from the Time Loop, I saw you talk about basically, because there's more to it, two conspiracies going on, not conspiracy theory, folks, conspiracy practice, we could call it. The five sense conspiracy, and we talked about that a little bit, and the extraterrestrial interdimensional conspiracy. And then you mentioned this, and I think it's so important, relating to the true vibrations, and I do ask you to react to that.
Right.
It's good to be aware of the five sense manipulation and the role of other dimensional entities, but the most important thing is our reality and how we create it. Is this central point our way out to break the spell?
Oh, yes. See, what the conspiracy is about, as I kind of indicated earlier, the foundation of it, it plays itself out in banking scams and political scams, engineered wars and engineered terrorist events and so on and so forth. But at its base, it's the manipulation of our sense of who we are and our sense of reality. And therefore, if we take control back of our own perceptions of reality and perceptions of self, then we disconnect, as those change, we disconnect from the hack, we disconnect from the manipulated perception.
From the double speak.
Yeah, because you see, we create our reality in the sense of our state of being, consciously and subconsciously, by having that expressed as a if you like, a magnetic field, and through what I call a magnetic, put it in simple terms, magnetic attraction. We are pulling in other energy fields, again, on the waveform level, in the metaphysical universe level of this reality. We're pulling in other energy fields that we call people, places, opportunities or lack of them, jobs, relationships, all the rest of it. And if we are manipulated from cradle to grave by the system, by the 24/7 impact of constant information giving us a version of who we are in the world, then that, if we take that on through the media and education and peer pressure and all that stuff, if we take that on as real, then that programs our sense of self in the world, therefore programs our state of being, therefore manifests through that the magnetic field, a vibrational attraction, as I call it, that is drawing in our lives in terms of people, places, ways of life, experiences, and so on. So we are still creating our own reality from the point of view of our state of being, and our sense of reality becomes, through the magnetic field we project, our experienced reality. But if you take it back one step from that, some other force is constantly programming what that core sense of being and sense of reality is, which manifests out as what we draw in to what we call our lives. So when you break that spell, when you break that programming of who we are and where we are and the nature of reality, then we, alley-bloody-lujah, can then start to create our own reality by coming to our own perceptions of self and the world, and therefore manifesting them in the magnetic field we project, and therefore in what we draw into our lives. And then we are truly creating our own reality, not only from the level of state of being becomes the magnetic field, becomes what we draw into our lives, but also from what that state of being originally decides in the way it sees itself in the world. That's what happens when we get the programming out of the way. And, people talk about, oh, you'll never get across human nature, mate. Well, what is human nature? The nature of humans at this moment, and for a long time what we call past, is actually programmed perceptions of self. It's not natural at all. It's programmed. And we can break that by breaking the spell of self-identity. And from self-identity changes becomes perception of the world changes, perception of self changes, perception of our own possibility and potential changes. Everything comes from that. It's absolutely vital that we do that. That's where the change is coming. Now, you talked there, John, about what I call the truth vibrations. The first book I wrote on any of these subjects 20 years ago was called The Truth Vibrations, because one of the first things that I learned when my life started to change and my mind started to open dramatically was that there was a vibrational change coming, which was going to act like a spiritual alarm clock. It was going to awaken people from their slumber, from their amnesia, from their coma state, their program state, their hypnotic state. And there was no evidence of that 20 years ago. None. And I took it on trust because it just felt so right. And the synchronicity of the way it came to me, something anyway was trying to tell me this. And 20 years on, my goodness me, it's happening. I've just ended a month of traveling to speak in New York, near San Francisco, a place called San Rafael, and Lisbon, Portugal, and Barcelona, Spain. I've never seen anything like it, mate. The interest in the information, the enthusiasm for it, the way people are getting it is just absolutely fantastic. And if you'd have told people 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this was going to happen, they'd have said, you're joking, mate. So this is happening. And what it's doing is it's breaking down. It's doing many things on many levels, but it's breaking down and breaking through this density of low vibrational energy that holds us in these eggshells, these bubbles, where the focus of the bubble is into the five senses. It's so small, that level of mind, even mind, not even all the possibility and potential of even mind we're talking about here with most people. That bubble of mind, which is disconnected in its sense of awareness from its greater consciousness, that bubble looks, if you like, through the five senses to try and get a fix on who it is and where it is and the nature of the world. Now, and who controls that? Those that own the media, those that own the banks, those that own the politics, those that own the oil cartel, the pharmaceutical cartel, the medical industry. All these things are those who own science, for goodness sake, mainstream science, what I call song sheet science. And so that information, which is designed to program a limited, you are powerless state of perception, is what you get when you rely on the five sense level of information to get a fix on yourself in the world. So basically, John, the foundation of the conspiracy is this: disconnect people from an awareness of who they really are, infinite consciousness, having an experience, get them to identify who they are with the experience, and then feed into that disconnected, incredibly limited level of perception, information through the five senses that programs that disconnected bubble to believe about self and the world what suits the agenda of the conspiracy. That's the whole basis of it. And to break that spell, it's to break that bubble. And to break that bubble, it's just moving your point of attention and observation and sense of perception from I am the name of the bubble, I am the job the bubble does, to I am infinite consciousness having an experience through the bubble, which doesn't have to be a bubble if I will just acknowledge who I really am, which is infinite consciousness having the experience. That bursts the bubble, and the game's over. And it's happening. It's happening because the truth vibrations are starting to impact themselves more and more. It's a bubble breaker. It's a bubble popper. And of course, the thinner that bubble is, the quicker it's going to pop. So the more aware, the more open, start to open to consciousness quicker. But now we're reaching the point, and I've been a barometer for this over 20 years, because when I started 20 years ago, crikey, virtually no one wanted to know, or the vast majority of what you do is ridicule and laugh and dismiss and all the rest of it. But what I'm seeing now is those that at one point had very thick bubbles, using this analogy, they're now popping. And it's like, whoa, if you're popping, anything's poppable, you know? So we're in this cusp where the truth vibrations, which is a vibrational change, perfectly natural, which is coming in to provide a new information epoch for the next age of human experience. It's replacing the old epoch, which was an information construct of suppression and limitation, just in experience. And we're in the cusp where one is now replacing the other. And the whole foundation of the control system is in the old epoch information construct. Because what is the control system about? And it's multi-levels in this reality and in other realities like non-human realities, etc. It is about suppression. It is about control. It is about limitation. It's a manifestation of the old epoch and even a distortion of the old epoch, as I talk about in my books and Will in Amsterdam. But so what I'm saying is, because of that, the control system must fall. It must, because the information basis on which it is manifest holographically is disappearing. It's being replaced by the new epoch of information, which is about expansion and freedom and anything but control and suppression. And what we're seeing now, and this is the reason why we're seeing at the same moment the police state and the control system apparently imposing itself more and more. At the same time, this massive global awakening is gathering by the day. It's because the control system knew this was coming. If I knew 20 years ago this was coming, then how long's the control system known about it? And it is trying to stop and block the inevitable.
Is this a totalitarian tiptoe you're talking about?
Yeah, well, it's a totalitarian global regime.
Because you know in advance, not just the financial market, but also the cosmic market, so to speak. And
what they've been doing, John, is they've been preparing for a long period to be at the peak of their suppression as this vibrational change takes place, this information change takes place. And what they're trying to do, while it appears on the surface that they're trying to gain more and more power, which in a way they are, but the reason they're trying to do it in the way they are is because they're trying to meet the threat, as it is to their control system, of this vibrational change and therefore this human awakening. And so we are seeing apparently this control system imposing itself ever more severely and to greater and greater extremes. But what we're really seeing from the perception that I'm talking about anyway, is a dying epoch and an expression of the dying epoch, throwing everything it can to try to survive in the death throes of the end of its period of existence. Because what it really wants, what this whole agenda really wants, and what that which is behind the human level of it really wants, is just to go on doing this indefinitely with the human population in total ignorance of what's happening. Because if you want to manipulate someone and you don't want to challenge to that manipulation, what's essential to that? They don't know they're being manipulated.
Secrecy.
Now, yeah, but so they would have been happy to continue the way they've been, which is the fact that they've been feeding off human efforts, human energy, human emotions, all this stuff, feeding off human resources, and they could just continue like that unchallenged. But they've had to up their game massively, and they knew that they would have to. That's why they've been planning this for so long. They knew they had to up their game to suppress a awakening humanity, which would start to see the game.
But David,
And therefore they couldn't hide it anymore. And because they've had to up their game, it's had to become manifest. And it's this dual situation we have now, whereby more and more people are waking up and opening their minds to a greater perception. And at the same time, the world before their eyes in holographic reality is it's showing them more and more obviously that actually the forces that control the world are not the ones they thought they were. So this is an amazing time to be in this I'm bloody glad I chose to come here now, I tell you. It's time to be here.
But I have to tell you, I feel some irony here, and you will feel this as well, because you wrote about it yourself. And the irony is also part of the solution you just talked about. And you're writing, ironically, the reptilians and their hybrid clones are terrified of humans, terrified of being exposed, there goes their secrecy cloth, and losing their energy source. And you're also saying the reptilians are themselves controlled by another force, other ETs, the transparents, I believe you call them. And you're saying that the reptilians themselves are in a way also an illusion, like the human race or the human body. They are computer programmed in this matrix. So there's even a deeper level to the irony, which is also part of the solution, that they need us for their energy feeding frenzy, so to speak, the energy of fear and negative emotions. But at the same time, they're terrified of us, the small people, because we are in such large numbers and we are growing our consciousness. That's it, right?
Yeah, but there's another level to this, which is that when you are in a certain mental and emotional state, i.e., in the example we're talking about, you desire control over others, then you, by that state of being, for the very reasons we've been talking about here, you have a limit to, in effect, how fast you can vibrate and how much you can access higher levels of consciousness. Whereas humans, vast numbers of humans, do not want control over other people, and have the potential, if they do, to an extent, to see the nonsense of it and to open their minds and their awareness and cease to want control over other people. And that means that human awareness is basically limitless in what it can expand to connect with. Whereas the predator race, the manipulation race and in all its forms, does not have that potential until it sees what a nonsense wanting control over is, and then the control system falls anyway because the people behind it don't want control anymore. So the predator consciousness or predator mind that is manipulating this reality, or the how part of it anyway, has to keep humans in a smaller box of awareness and perception than it's in, because it's in a box, and a very small box, really. It's much more, if you like, intellectually, therefore, in terms of technology and the possibility of manipulating reality, more aware. But in terms of the truly aware, the truly conscious, it's in a box. And what it's had to do is keep humans in a smaller box. It's like the old phrase, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So that it can control us. And what this truth vibrations is doing is starting to tease open, in some people massively open, their minds to this greater awareness. And at which point, we start to see and go beyond what this predator race can perceive. And one other thing, John, goes with a desire for power over, and that is insecurity. Secure people do not want power over anybody. They want power to create their own reality as they see fit, but they don't want power over others. And they don't want to control everything because they're at ease with flowing with life and seeing where it goes, enjoying the adventure. They don't want to absolutely be able to tell you what's going to happen this Tuesday. They don't want to go to a football match and be able to tell you or be able to know what the score is before the game started because they're controlling both sides and the referee. They just want to play with life. Hey, this is great. It's going to be interesting who wins today or how the game unfolds. And so what we're dealing with is a controlling mentality which appears to be strutting and arrogant and all-powerful, and it seems to be like that on one level. But it's the little boy, the little frightened boy, inside the body of the playground bully, and he needs the gang to give him confidence and to let him overcome that little boy inside. Because and what happens with bullies is most of them are frightened little boys, and if you take them on, they just fold before your eyes. And what their control up to that point has not been because they were stronger than you, but because you had the perception that they were stronger than you. And this is how the manipulation works, and this is how the programming works. And so we're in a situation where we're controlled by a mentality that is deeply, deeply, beyond our perception, deeply insecure, and is terrified of exposure, both because of the numbers, as you rightly say, but also the number difference, but also because of the potential, the true potential of humanity, compared with the potential of the box they're in because of their state of being. And I quote in my last book, and I quote in my talks, like in Amsterdam, a guy called Don Juan Matos, who was the shaman source in the Carlos Castaneda books of the 60s and 70s, Central American shaman. Some people say he didn't exist, some people say he did, but whatever, the words put into his mouth are absolutely spot on. And I came across the quotes that I use in the book while I was well into the book, and after I'd come up with this whole perception and background to the moon and what the moon is actually transmitting to affect us. And I was like, whoa, this is absolutely encapsulating it. And one quote from Don Juan Matos, quoted by Castaneda, said this: I know even now that you never have suffered hunger. You have food anxiety, but you have food anxiety, which is none other than the anxiety of the predator who fears that at any moment now its maneuver is going to be uncovered and food is going to be denied. Because, as I explain in my book and in the talks, the predator mind has been connected to the human collective mind, and therefore we feel a lot of the things that they're feeling. It's where anxiety and worry and all this stuff constantly people feel comes from. So Don Juan Matos goes on, through the mind, which is after all their mind, the predators inject into the lives of human beings whatever is convenient to them. And they ensure, in this manner, a degree of security to act as a buffer against their fear. This is crucial. I've been going on about this for 20 bloody years. Sorcerers of ancient Mexico reasoned that man must have been a complete being at one point, with stupendous insights, feats of awareness that are mythological legends nowadays. And then everything seems to disappear, and we now have a sedated man. What I'm saying is that we have against us not a simple predator. It is very smart and organized. It follows a methodical system to render us useless. Man, the magical being that he is destined to be, yes, he is, as this truth vibrations unfolds, is no longer magical. He's an average piece of meat. There are no more dreams for man, but for dreams of an animal that is being raised to be a piece of meat, trite, conventional, imbecilic. And what he's talking about there, in terms of this sedated man, that's the fall of man. That's what he's talking about in his own way. This sedated man, where we had stupendous insights, feats of awareness, mythological legends that I talked about earlier. They're not mythological in the sense they weren't true. They're actually memories and accounts of things that actually were real. And then everything, he says, seems to disappear, and we have sedated man. Well, the reason everything disappeared, I would suggest, and we have sedated man and women, humans, is because of this hack, because of this takeover. And I'm understanding more and more by the day how they've done it and how they're doing it. It's why my talks are constantly updated as I go around the world, as I understand more.
Well, we could say we are in line with the hive mind of our own predators.
Exactly.
And before you said something important, you desire control over others. Well, one of our websites is healingsoundmovement.com. The other one is worldpeacechild.com. And I want to go to that because I think it's so important. It touched me when I heard those words. You desire control over others. Then I thought about the children, and I want to go into that because I also know you'd find this an important subject. What about the legalized children theft going on? Because that's a new chapter in your book, and I was surprised you were writing about it. And in a way, I was shocked. I mean, there's a lot of shocking information if you never heard it before, but at least you get the chance to resonate with it and change your perception so your world changes and it's not a flat earth anymore. So that gives a lot of freedom in the end. But this was shocking to me because I didn't know there was so much. I know about pedophilia in the highest regions and everything, but legalized children theft. Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, we see there are certain pieces when you put this puzzle together over the years, there are certain pieces that are far more important. They're transformative in your understanding of how it fits together. Because what appears to be in isolation starts to fit into all these other pieces. And you start to say, hey, so that's why that happens because of this. And that's why that happens because of this. And when I've been researching this over the 2 decades, one of the things that came up pretty early on, really, as I researched the people, the personnel behind the control system in what you might call the human level, our conscious reality, that Satanism, the sacrifice of humans, the sacrifice of animals, etc., and blood drinking rituals and all the rest of it, and pedophilia came up again and again and again as I tracked these personnel through from being politicians, etc., and bankers on CNN and Fox News and the BBC. As I tracked back from there, I started to see that again and again and again, I was looking at a pedophile, I was looking at a Satanist, often both. And it became clear that the ratio of Satanists and pedophiles to the what we call, laughingly, the upper echelons of society are infinitely greater than they are in the general population. And so the question then is, why? What's going on here? And we come back to this predator race, what I call the reptilians, although there are other what are termed demonic entities that are involved as well. Not just reptilian, they seem to be a real prime one on the level that they operate, one step back from the human bloodlines we call the Illuminati. Anyway, when they're doing these rituals, these satanic rituals, they are in one way, the way they do the rituals, and this is why they do the same rituals now that they were doing in ancient Babylon and so on. The way they do the rituals affects the energetic construct of the place where the ritual is taking place. And it allows often brief, but doorways, vibrational doorways to open, which allow these entities in the more extreme rituals to manifest in front of them. I've talked to people who've taken part in these rituals who have described this to me, and not just one or two either, people in different parts of the world, how these entities manifest, and they manifest in certain these things like the pentagram, which of course the reverse pentagram is the classic symbol of Satanism, and these other things. Again, we keep coming back to the same thing if we want to understand this. You look at a pentagram and it appears to be, in the holographic world, just a symbol. But if you take that symbol back to the metaphysical universe, the prime construct from where that symbol is manifest from, then it's information. And that information has an effect on other information around it in what we call the location of the ritual, which allows certain things to happen that wouldn't happen if that information hadn't been introduced, if you follow what I'm saying here. I'm sure you do.
Like a cymatic influence creating a negative sacred space as a portal. something
Yeah,
like that.
and well, you can create a negative space, and you can create a very benevolent, supportive space, but
Sure.
it depends on the information you introduced into the place you're doing the ritual in.
And the intention you program it with, I guess.
Exactly. Well, the intention is an energetic construct in itself, which you imprint upon everything that you do, and so these satanic sacrifice rituals. What's happening is in the holographic realm, you've got what we perceive as human Satanists doing their rituals, manifesting their demonic masters. And even in the less kind of, if you like, advanced of them, allow manifestation like that, you've got human sacrifice. And what is happening is while the human Satanists are doing the sacrifice and drinking the blood, and apparently just before sacrifice, as the terror of the victim builds up, there's an adrenaline that enters the blood that is like kind of a nectar to these people, these sick people, and so they drink the blood immediately. The sacrifice has been done because it still contains this adrenaline. Anyway, that's the human level, but out just beyond this reality are these entities, and what they're feeding off is the energy of fear, the energy of terror, and the energy of the victim going through a horrendous emotional trauma. And so when you look at the ancient accounts around the world of human sacrifices made in the ancient world to, quote, the gods, and the gods are what I'm talking about, and the way they were perceived as gods, then they talk about sacrifices to the gods, and what they were doing is what I'm describing. This is what the gods they were talking about are the ones I've just been describing. Now move this on to pedophilia, because this is why the rings of pedophilia and the rings of Satanism connect so powerfully. Doesn't mean that every Satanist is a pedophile or every pedophile is a Satanist or whatever, but a lot of them are both, and their rings, their networks certainly connect at certain levels, top levels, very, very fundamentally.
Because of the energy vampirism, so to speak?
Because they're two expressions of the same mentality. Mm-hmm. Because as I go on to talk to about pedophilia, these entities want more than anything human energy before puberty. Because again, what happens at puberty, as we perceive it in the holographic realm, is that there's a chemical change taking place, which fundamentally changes the body and fundamentally changes the nature of the person. Now, if you take that chemical change back to its base construct, however, in the metaphysical universe, the waveform level, the base construct, then that chemical is merely a holographic expression of vibrational information. And it's the vibrational information being introduced into the body, which is changing the body, which manifests as the chemical change in the level of holographic perception. Because, of course, if consciousness, a fully aware consciousness entered this realm through a child's body, it would die of bloody frustration, wouldn't it? I mean, you imagine being you now in a child's body. I mean, you go crazy. And so the body goes through certain stages, and as it goes through these stages, the 7 years seems to be a pretty much a guideline of this. Then more of the awareness manifests itself as the body allows it to express itself. And so when you get to puberty, you're going through this massive change where the child is moving through to become the adult physically. And as a result of that puberty change, or what triggers that puberty change, is an information change at the waveform level, which is manifest as the chemical change in the world that we perceive. What is happening, in other words, is the information in that person's energy field is fundamentally changing at puberty. And for some reason, these entities want the energy before that change. So when they talked in the ancient world about making sacrifices of young virgins to the gods, the young virgin was simply code for children. And so what is happening is these, I'm not saying this is always the case, I'm saying it's dramatically, overwhelmingly the case, is that these pedophiles, particularly, of course, these high-level pedophiles who are connected and possessed by these entities, they are stimulated by this possession to want sex with children. When they're having sex with children, they are merely a conduit for the possessing entity to feed off and draw from the child the energy that these entities want.
For them, it's just a download, so to speak.
Yeah, they're vampiring. They're vampiring the child's energy through the conduit within this reality, which can directly, sick as it may be, interact with the child. They're using the pedophile as the conduit to vampire the energy. And there's another quote in the Carlos Castaneda books from Don Juan Matters, in which Castaneda is explaining what Don Juan said to him, and he says this, Castaneda. He explained that sorcerers saw infant human beings as strange luminous balls of energy, covered from the top to the bottom with a glowing coat, something like a coat of plastic adjusted tightly around the cocoon of energy. He said that that glowing coat of awareness was what the predators consumed, and that when a human reached adulthood, all that was left of that fringe awareness was a narrow fringe that went from the ground to the top of the toes. That fringe permitted mankind to keep on living, but only barely. And my research over all these years has found exactly that, which is why, in my multi-level, multi-subject years of research, Satanism and pedophilia has come up again and again and again in relation to the leading figures in this global conspiracy that are running the banks, politics, pharmaceuticals, and all this stuff. When you get to the higher echelons.
But David, hold on a minute. Am I right that they need, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they need, let's say it like this, they need the biophysical energy fields frenzy to hold their form because otherwise they cannot shapeshift, or is there more to it?
Well, there's more to it in the fact that the entities themselves that are possessing the human hybrids, the human reptilian hybrids that I talk about, which we call the ruling families of the banking system, royalty, politics, etc. They're feeding off the energy of children, and indeed the energy of humans in general. But children is what they want primarily, or more than anything else. But in the other way, yes. You see, these hybrids are part reptilian and part human, but they're more part reptilian than the general human population. People don't realize that the human body in general has some fundamental levels of reptilian genetics in it, not least a part of the brain which is known as the reptilian brain, or the R complex, as some scientists call it, which is fundamental in human behavior and human perception. It's constantly scanning the environment for threats to survival, not just physical survival, but financial survival, relationship survival, and job survival, and all the rest of it. And through the reptilian brain, this constant anxiety and fear and worry and lack of harmony, lack of peace comes from overwhelmingly, and it comes through broadcasts, I would suggest, from the moon. But that's a long story I go to in the books and the talks. But so these hybrid bodies are again go back to the foundation of what they are. They're waveform information, and so that waveform information contains information from with a massively greater input of the reptilian information compared with the human information, compared with the general human population. This is why these hybrids constantly interbreed with each other. The royal families, the banking families, the political families. You look at the genealogy, and you're seeing again and again how these people interbreed with each other. Why? Because when you breed that information, in other words, you exchange that information with the general human population, which has a different information construct, then the hybrid information is diluted very quickly. So they are constantly interbreeding with themselves, downloading information from the hybrid construct with information from the hybrid construct in terms of their partner to create children that offspring that contain the same hybrid construct. This is where all the interbreeding comes from, and it's where all the blue blood interbreeding comes from, and how we've got to keep the genes up. Well, it's not really keeping the genes up; it's keeping the gene program the same. And so when we're talking about shape shifting, we're talking about those times, and it often happens when these people, these hybrids in apparently human form, get into great states of emotion and fury. Because when you feel fury, and you can often, if it's really extreme, you can actually feel almost like an electrical charge going through your body. And when it gets really extreme, that electrical charge can morph the information construct of the hybrid construct, so that the reptilian part of it becomes the dominant one. And at which point, those observing that see someone apparently shift from a human form into a reptilian form and back again. But they're not physically shifting, because there is no physical. What's happening is the observer is being shown human information. That's what they decode.
A different projection from an information signature was just shifted.
Yeah, and then they're suddenly shown reptilian information. They decode that, and then after the morph, it morphs back to its base state, default state, if you like, and the human information is presented to them. Now, to the observer decoding this, someone's gone from human to reptilian to human, but the only place it's happened, quote, physically, is in their decoding system, in their heads, on their screen. To stop this happening, because if you interbreed too much in certain ways, then only within these hybrids, what tends to happen is that the reptilian genetics becomes more and more dominant over what we call time. And so the human form finds it harder and harder to hold steady, and it keeps shifting. And so every now and again, they will have an infusion of human genetics into their hybrid state to basically bring it back to this greater balance between human and hybrid, so they don't keep shifting. And one of the effects I'm very aware of these truth vibrations, this vibrational change, this information change, is that they are finding it harder and harder to not shift.
The software, they need another software upgrade.
Yeah, and one of the things that they're doing, and this comes back to your question a few minutes ago, is that they're drinking more and more human blood, which carries what? The human genetic code, the human information code. And so I was told about this, by people who've been involved in this whole satanic situation. I was told this 15, 16 years and since then, that this drinking more and more human blood was starting to happen, so that they could keep infusing the human level or the hybrid construct with human information, so that it could hold that human projection, so that we could go on believing and seeing the illusion that actually they're human in their entire state. They're not.
Clear. Okay, and I'm also thinking about another important aspect, talking about the religious mind prisons, and you're saying the high initiates know how to read the same religious stories symbolically. And my question is, what's the real deal going on here with all this religion? Because there seems to be an outer expression of religion and an inner symbolic kind of religion where people, the high initiates, know the real deal, right?
Yeah, but you've got to get somewhere pretty close to the spider, as I call it. in this global web before you understand the true significance of what these texts are saying, because it's fiercely compartmentalized, and there are legions of people at different levels of, for instance, the Freemasons, that think they've been told the truth as they go up the levels, but then find at a higher level being told that actually don't believe what you were told before. That was just for people at that level. This is the real truth. But then again, the same deal happens again, and they get a bit higher, and they realize that at that level, that wasn't the truth either. And eventually, you reach an inner core within this secret society network, where the Freemasons are the Knights of Malta, are the Knights Templar, etc., are the Jesuits, are the Opus Dei, and at that level, you're beyond even the top levels of the secret societies, like the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. There's two 33rd degrees. There's that level where people are left to believe they've reached the top, and they go no further because they didn't think there is any further. And there's another 33rd degree level where they become aware that the fact that they are entering the bottom level of the next pyramid, which no one ever talks about. It's what I call the Illuminati pyramid, which is fed into by the chosen ones through Freemasonry, Knights of Malta, Jesuits, all the ones I've mentioned, and many more. And so at that deeper level, they are given the language of symbolism and fundamentally the language of words, which seems obvious. Well, it's words, of course it's the language of words, but I mean the language of the real meaning of words, not the version of meaning that we have been given. And so when something is said, we will read it one way because that's what we've been led to believe these words mean. Mm-hmm. But an inner initiate will know what they're really saying because he will know what the words really mean. And again, to the point of tedium, maybe we got to go back to the metaphysical universe because that's what words are. They are vibrational information constructs. And they manifest in the holographic world as what we call words. But I mean, why do we have vocal cords? To vibrate, and they create sound through vibration, and the way we articulate that sound becomes the words that people hear coming from our mouths. But at their base state is vibration, and this is why that very interesting man, Dr. Emoto in Japan, who I co-wrote a book with in Japanese and met and spent a whole weekend with on one occasion in London. That's why he is able to get canisters of water, put words on the side of it like hate or love and appreciation, freeze the water very, very quickly. I've seen his operation in Tokyo where he does it. Mm-hmm. And then once the water is frozen very quickly, he then photographs the crystals immediately before, of course, it starts to melt. And what he's found is extraordinary. And he's produced many books with the pictures, whereby when you, for instance, see water crystals that have had words of love and appreciation written on the side, just written in language, with a pen or something, the crystals from that water are beautiful. They're harmonious. They are geometrically perfect often. But they're beauty, they're things of beauty. And then you see water crystals photographed after words of, "You make me sick, I want to kill you," have been written on the side of the water. And my goodness me, it's just horrible when you see the crystals. They have no form, they're just a mess, they're like a blob. Because when you're coming from where I'm suggesting, which is that everything in the holographic existence, what we call the physical world, is at its base a vibrational information field, then words taken back from written language to their base state, which is vibrational, become vibrational constructs. And so when you put words of love and appreciation and you write them and attach them to the side of a canister of water, they are vibrating into that water that information. Why? Because at their base state, they are waveform information. The water is waveform information, and the canister the water is in is waveform information. And thus there is an information exchange at the level of waveform. And thus, when you freeze the water, you freeze that information. And when you photograph it, you're photographing that information in a water crystal form. And the water crystals therefore express the vibration that has been infused into the water by the words. And this is why, and we all have to remember this. There's no exceptions. We need to think on how we use words and what the effect of those words are on other people. I mean, even on the basic fact, John, that the vast majority of the body is water, then that water is being infused by the words that are spoken. Now, I mean, just take that another level, and where do most people spend hours and hours and hours a day of their lives? Sitting in front of a television being spoken at. So, you can see how the programming can work, not just in an academic, intellectual sense, but how it can happen on a waveform sense. And at the core of this global network of manipulation, they bloody well know this. And they've structured the society, the world that we live in, on the basis of knowing that. And that's why we live in the world that we do. So it's very important if we're going to understand what's happening in this world, to realize that it's just a holographic expression of information in the vibrational world. And the vast majority, I mean, of what we call our consciousness or mind is actually what is known as the subconscious. And the conscious mind that we're aware of in our everyday lives is a fraction of actually the deeper levels of mind. And those levels of mind are what? They're vibrations. They're vibrational constructs. So the vast majority of our mind is actually attached to the metaphysical universe, and there is affected by it, and is affecting it. And this is why people's personalities are so fundamentally driven by subconscious states of being, subconscious mental and emotional states.
I have to tell you, being a sound healer and a music producer and a neuropsychologist, and being a little bit of an expert on the non-local consciousness and the biophysics of information transfer at a distance, and you can call it biophysics or scalar electromagnetics or digital biology, all those kind of things, and they still work on a physical level, although not psychoneuroimmunological, so local, but as field effect going out into the world. But you can also have the cosmos coming into your world, or a TV, so you're completely right here. But I think it's important to say that sound, like it shows in cymatics, is a carrier wave of consciousness, so you're absolutely right. And I just want to say, as being a neuropsychologist, that I know that the ear, where it vibrates, so to speak, the inner ear, is connected to the 10th nerve, and that nerve goes to all organs. So imagine what sound can do, because it's connected throughout our whole body.
Absolutely. And when I talk about the what I call the body computer decoding reality, I don't just mean the brain. Obviously, the brain, which I call the central processing unit of the body computer, the CPU, is the prime, as the CPU is in a computer in front of me. It's the prime processor of information traffic on one level, but the whole, what we call genetic structure, is doing the decoding, because on one fundamental level, the human body computer is a crystalline receiver transmitter of information, and yes, it's the whole genetic structure, a whole cellular structure that is decoding reality all the time. And so again, the more you talk about this, the more that I go through these different levels, the more people, I hope, can see how all these different levels connect and all these dots connect. Because if you can infuse rogue information, the equivalent of a computer virus, into the body computer via additives in food, additives in drink and water, like fluoride and aspartame and all this stuff, and through electromagnetic pollution, microwave pollution, mobile phone pollution, and all the rest of it.
Vaccinations.
Yeah, vaccinations is classic. It's classic. Just it's rogue information. It's a computer virus, and the people behind the people who do it and behind the people who physically produce it, they know exactly what vaccines are doing, and it's all coldly calculated. And so what's happening is that they are distorting the body's ability to decode information in the way that it normally would. And this is all part of the destabilization of human awareness as well. And the reason all this stuff is coming in now, or has come in over the last few decades particularly, I mean, the whole chemical food thing has really started after the Second World War, and it's just gone crazy till it's now the norm. It's all coldly calculated to distort the body computer's ability to decode this new vibrational information, all part of the firewall against the truth vibrations, if you like. And we are seeing the same with genetically modified food, which is designed to genetically modify us and distort the way that we interact with reality. That's what it's there for, and it's all connected. It's all connected. And when people see that, they can cross this line from seeing, even if they're a bit more aware of the great injustice in the world and the great ludicrous ways that things are done. Ludicrous on the level that you're perceiving them from the fact that the people doing it should be serving humanity or have some benevolent agenda for humanity. It looks ludicrous. But when you realize they have a completely evil, the reverse of live, very, very appropriately, agenda for humanity, then you start to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And it's all about suppressing our ability to awaken.
Well, regarding that last sentence, we are living in Holland. You are coming to Amsterdam on the 27th of November to RAI Amsterdam. And,
yeah, week on Saturday, yeah.
Yeah, and that's www.purityevents.nl. But we are in Holland. Any words for the Dutch royals? I'm thinking Bernard, Beatrix.
Oh, well, they are part of this whole bloodline network. That's why you've got the Dutch royal family, who are some of the most regular attenders from the start of things like the Bilderberg Group, this grouping of people to coordinate the same agenda through politics in different countries and banking and business and NATO and all the rest of it. And there are,
am I correct? There are Nazi links as well to Bernard and to Merck and the vaccination industry.
Oh, there's see, because you've got this web. Once you start investigating one part of the web, i.e., for instance, the Dutch royal family, then you start to hit all the other parts of the web. That's why what you've just described always kind of happens. And I was speaking in Barcelona about 10 days ago, like I said earlier. And one of the things I pointed out there is that they don't have a Spanish royal family, just as we don't have a British royal family. And you don't have I mean, I'm going to look at this in more detail before I speak on a week on Saturday, but you don't really have a Dutch royal family because when you look at the genetic background and the genealogy, you've got King Carlos of Spain and his wife, Queen Sophia, who are really from a host of European bloodlines, German and British and Danish and all the rest of it. And then you look at the British royal family, who are only called Windsor, by the way, because they changed their name during World War One. Before that point, they were called the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which is a German royal line, or at least it goes back to Germany.
And it's the same with Rothschilds and Rockefeller, right?
Well, yes, they originate from Germany. Goldman and Sachs, that became Goldman Sachs, originate from Germany, from Bavaria. And then you look at Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, German. And they'll go out into other parts of the European royal family network, because it's not the royal families of Europe, it's the royal family of Europe. And so you've got Prince Philip, who's the husband of our Queen Elizabeth II, and he's got German genetic connections and relations and relatives, and same it goes into the Dutch and the Greek areas of Europe, not the Dutch, the Danish rather, and the Greek areas of Europe. And so it's like a corporation. And it's like, hey, we've got a vacancy in Greece. You know, we're going to have a royal family. Okay, well, what about so and so? He's in Denmark at the moment. Should we send him? Oh, yes, he'll be good. Yes, well, now he's a Greek king or something. You know, this is how it works. It's not the way people see it, because in terms of the British royal family, the Windsors, of course, they found themselves, as the German House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, in a country that was at war with their homeland, Germany, during the First World War. So it was kind of bad PR, so they changed the name to Windsor, just for that reason. And we had another aristocratic royal bloodline in Britain before that point called Battenberg, which of course is German. And they changed that to Mountbatten at the same time because their country, or the country they are supposed to represent as royals, was at war with their homeland of Germany. I mean, it's like, if it wasn't so tragic for human life and human suffering, it would be
a great joke. Yes,
it would be hilarious. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's the Queen. She represents England. Oh, sure she does. Yeah. Unless England's, just invaded Germany, and like America was supposed to invade the Isle of Wight, as I talked about earlier. Well, she's not really English, right? In that sense, certainly the royal family isn't.
Unfortunately, it is not hilarious. It is tragic. But talking about the Nazi links to the royals, I believe we could also backtrace this to the esoteric, occult, and to the religious aspect, because I think it's important to tell the general listeners this. You're writing that the Crown, well, actually the Crown Temple, controls and owns the world, even America and the UK, the banking, the legal system, everything. But who, in the end, David, controls the crown? I thought the answer is quite fascinating. So the crown owns the world, the banking, legal system, but who controls the crown temple?
Well, the thing is that it's like a web. You can symbolize it as oh God, I need a bit of healing. You can symbolize it as a pyramid with a few at the top of the capstone and the rest going down into mainstream society at the bottom. Or you can symbolize it as a spider's web with a spider at the center and the strands going out. And each of the strands is a secret society or an organization or a government or a pharmaceutical company, whatever. And the closer the strands are to the center of the web, the spider, the more secretive and exclusive they are. And the further they go out, they eventually start to be organizations that interact with mainstream society that people would know about. So there are different levels of it. How close to the spider is it? On one level, you've got this crown temple where you get the Knights Templar and people like that. Knights of Malta are involved, and another level beyond them, basically they're controlled through the Vatican, and the Vatican City, of course, is a city within a country. It's got its own diplomatic operation and its own national identity, the Vatican City. Well, what a lot of people don't realize, even perhaps especially in Britain, is that the City of London financial district, what is known as the City of London, the original City of London, around St. Paul's Cathedral and the Bank of England, that's also like a Vatican City. It's got its own police force, it's got its own operation. It is, in fact, a country within a country. In which the Queen has to ask permission of the people that run it to enter it, and so the Knights Templar and people like that in the end answer to the Vatican, which then answers to the real center of the spider, all these non-human entities and stuff that I'm talking about. That is involved in the control of the City of London, and that has a fundamental effect on not just the global economy, but the global manipulation in general. And the legal profession in Britain, which is run and out of that around the world, is run from a place called the Temple, which is named after the fact that a Knights Templar temple is in that area, so they call it the Temple. It's the temple that was featured in the Da Vinci Code in the Temple part of London, and that very close to where that temple is, that original Knights Templar temple, are all the centers, secret societies, and the chambers of the major barristers and legal firms of Britain, and the lawyer legal networks that go out into manipulating the legal system of America and Australia and endless other places. And just down the road from where that Knights Templar temple is are the chambers where Tony Blair was working at one point, and his wife Cherry Blair, and so the Temple area, the Temple district of London, the next place on is the City of London, and at the cusp, a place that's known as Temple Bar, where the Temple, the center of control of the legal system in Britain and wider afield, meets the City of London, the control of not just the British economy and the British governments, but massively the world situation. At that point where the two areas meet is a flying reptile on a big kind of plinth, if you like, in the middle of the road. It's a very famous symbol, and when you enter the City of London, not just there, but through other roads, you pass massive symbols of flying reptiles holding the shield with a red cross on the white background, which is the symbol of the Knights Templar. If you understand the symbolism, they're telling you who controls the bloody place, and so the Vatican appears to be the center of a religion, but actually it's the center in so many ways of a secret society network, which uses religion to placate and suppress the population, and it does it by producing written texts, which we call the Bible, the Holy Book, and of course the Jewish religion has a version of that, with again the Old Testament of the Bible and the Torah and the Talmud, the much deeper esoteric level. You've got the Quran with the Muslims, etc. And these are texts that are written on one level for the congregation or the followers of the religion to take literally. But because of the way words don't mean what they in their esoteric behind the scenes sense that they do in the way that we're told to believe them and what they mean, those texts can also be read in a completely different way. So you said earlier, I've been saying it for years, there's this outer religion, which is basically the people following the religion taking the texts literally. There's this inner core behind all that, behind all the men in frocks and the people with the fish head bloody hats, the mitre and all the rest of it, which again is massively symbolic, going back to Babylon and such like. They have a completely different understanding of the same texts and what the religion is really saying and what the religion is really about and what its motivations are. So there's an outer religion and there's an inner cabal that are using the outer religion as a cover for its activities.
And do they use Kabbalism?
The Kabbalah is very fundamental. The esoteric knowledge in the Kabbalah and is very much used by this network, absolutely, and even deeper levels of understanding that, of course, are never written down for public consumption. Even on the level of the Kabbalah, there's a deeper level even than that the inner initiates have that the outer initiates don't have.
The oral one-to-one transmission, so to speak.
Yeah, and what you've got with the Kabbalah, of course, is the same phonetics basically as Cabal, and that's not a coincidence. It's very bloody appropriate.
Now you're talking about the spider in the web, and I think the Vatican is one of the biggest spiders in the web. Well, on this level at least, because we're not talking about the multidimensional, interdimensional extraterrestrials here for now. What I like, because we also talked about the royals, and you've explained that we can also talk, what you discuss in your book, about the hive mind, and there's the queen and the workers. I think that's maybe even more appropriate than the spider and the web here. What I think is interesting, you mentioned the Da Vinci Code in relation to the Vatican. Of course, in this kind of field, there's a lot of disinformation. I'm curious, you have a different kind of view of what the Da Vinci Code is, probably on purpose, stating that it's all about the secret of the lineage of Jesus, but I believe that's bollocks in your case, right?
Well, I'm not saying it's necessarily done on purpose. It might have been done on purpose, but it might not. It might just have been taking a story from Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which was written as fact rather than fiction, and turning it into a story. It might be that. Either way. Whether it's Holy Blood, Holy Grail that was written as fact, or the Da Vinci Code that was written as faction, if you like, fiction, but with a lot of alleged truth. And I think there was because there is a secret society network, and they are hiding secrets. The question is, what are the bloody secrets, John? That's the question. And the whole basis of Holy Blood, Holy Grail and the Da Vinci Code was that there was a man called Jesus who didn't die on the cross, or if he did, he impregnated Mary Magdalene in the Bible stories, and she headed to southern France, and eventually a bloodline of Jesus emerged and became the Merovingian bloodline in France. Which is connected to virtually all, if not all, of the surviving royal families of Britain, located in what we call now Paris, but a major bloodline at one point in France, now what we call France. Now that's all based on the fact that this bloodline is known about by the Roman Catholic Church, and that it is used secrecy and secret societies to suppress that knowledge. That's the whole basis of these things. But it's based on one thing. Its whole foundation is on one thing, and that's that there was a Jesus, and I'm saying there wasn't. When you read the Jesus stories, which through the Gospels are very contradictory in many ways, but there are themes for sure. Then that same basic story has been told many, many, many times around the world in endless different cultures, not just in Europe and the Middle East. I was down at the home of Credo Mutwa, the Zulu shaman, who's coming up to his 90th year now, back in August, and he's built, or had built, organized to be built, a couple of stone circles next to his house, and also a brilliant statues which he creates and paints and what have you, symbolizing various ancient legends and situations in Africa. And one of them is of a man with, I think it was a crown of thorns, I'm sure that was there on his head, dying in the arms of these people. And I said to him, "What's that? He looks like Jesus." He said, "Well, yeah, but he said it's not, because he said when missionaries came in to Africa and started bringing the Christian religion and imposing it upon the black African tribes at the time, Credo was saying that a lot of people, the black people, black tribes, didn't have a problem with that, because the basic story was the story they were already telling about someone else under a different name in Africa. You see the symbol of the dying God, of the sacrificed God who died to save humanity, again and again and again, repeated around the world. They just take the same story and they relocate it in another location and another historical setting, and another religion unfolds as a result of it. And so when you look at the evidence for the existence of Jesus, the existence of what happened, and of course, if what happened, there would have been some tremendously wide-ranging accounts of it. I mean, crikey, what was supposed to have happened. But there are none. And those few here and there that do appear have invariably been shown to have been put in there later to support the claims of the Christian religion that its story was true and had historical support. But there is none. It's like you look at the Old Testament stories of the Israelites and what they were supposed to be and what they should have done. And archaeologists and what have you, and historians who've studied that have found there is no evidence whatsoever that any of that happened. And so without Jesus, there can be no bloodline of Jesus. Therefore, there can be no secrecy to stop people knowing about the bloodline of Jesus. What there is a secret society network, and the Vatican is very much involved in it. Mm-hmm. What there is a massive secret about the manipulation of human history, the manipulation of human genetics, the manipulation of human life to this day, minute by minute, and the secret society networks that are there to keep that quiet, among many other things. That's the secret. And so I look at Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and I think they were genuine people. I'm not having a go at them. This stuff takes some uncovering because it doesn't want to be uncovered. And you look at the Da Vinci Code, and I'm saying that some of the fundamentals of secret societies and secrets are right, but the nature of the secrets, I think, are fundamentally misunderstood, being charitable misunderstood.
Different players, same game plan, you say somewhere. That's what I'm thinking of in politics. Two sides, well, basically one puppet player at the back doing the same game plan. It doesn't matter what the polarities are. And it's the same with religion, so it seems. By the way, and I think we have to close down the list of questions here, but
I was supposed to be somewhere
like 10 hours ago, I believe.
Yeah. So, but this has been such an interesting conversation that I've kind of delayed it, but I better get off soon.
Okay, well, thank you for that indirect compliment. I didn't see any comment on Skype, so I thought, well, he either forgot.
Don't get me into comments on Skype. That's too technical. That's too technical for me, mate.
Well, that's
too technical for me.
There was resonance for me saying, like, okay, if he really had to go, he would probably type something or said something.
All right, gotcha. No.
Okay.
I was enjoying it. I was enjoying it very much. It's been a very interesting conversation.
Likewise, it's been an honor for me, and I feel extremely privileged to have had this talk. I think we covered a lot of ground and we got a lot of important information. I want to tell the people I have a lot of books here because you wrote a lot of books. They all feel important. I read them all, but I think the last one, Human Race, Get Off Your Knees, The Lion Sleeps No More. The title is extremely obvious. I think it's up to us and to our infinite consciousness to change our perception, to change our reality, and therefore empower us back into a position where we can create our manifestation, our reality, the way we want, right? Any closing comments from your end, David?
Just a round of applause to that, really. But we're now in very, very exciting times because clearly, I have the privilege to travel a great deal and talk about this, and therefore I meet and I observe and experience people from many, many different cultures. I'm just going in February to the Ukraine. It's the first movement to get this information through into Eastern Europe, and I'm going to Mexico and where I've never been for the first time. I've just well, not I've been, but never spoken there on these subjects. And same with Spain, same with Portugal, and wherever I go, the minds are opening. People are getting it. People are remembering, because I'm not telling anyone what they don't already know. I'm just saying, do you remember this, basically? Because we at deeper levels, we all know this stuff, and that's one of the powers of behind people waking up now so fast, is that they're remembering. They're not being told something new. That's just a reminder. Like, you remember who you are? Remember? Oh yes, that's basically what's happening, and so. It's an amazing transformation that started to really motor to the point where it's at that point where it's starting to impact, and we've seen nothing yet, impact on society and the way events unfold. And at the same time, of course, the control system has got everything it has in its remaining armory, and it's going to throw them in its panic-stricken way, though it's going to appear very cold and calculated. On the outside, it's like a duck, it seems very calm on the surface, but it's paddling like crazy underneath. So these two things are happening, the irresistible force, which is the truth vibrations, and the immovable object, which thinks it is but isn't, which is the control system. And they're now, stepping out onto the stadium with a ball in each hand to play this out in public now, because that's where it's going to be played out more and more and more in the mainstream over the next few years. And these are very exciting times, times when we can have the privilege, and that's what it is, of playing a part in the transformation of human awareness from the prison to the paradise, because that's where we're heading. That's where particularly our grandchildren and many of the younger people today will experience through their lives. Compared with what we've experienced up to this point, and generations before us have experienced. It's a wonderful time. It's a wonderful time. Come on, let's go.
I loved it that last year when you did your 10-hour talk, you expressed the, I think, very important feeling I also felt. Don't fight. Just hold your ground and work with your consciousness and your chains of perception and the real reality, and create and manifest what you do want. Create a paradise on earth if you have the opportunity, because if you fight, you exactly identify and attract those forces you do not want to become manifested in the world, because they already are, because of the manipulation. So
what you fight, you become. What
yes.
You fight, you become. We've seen this over and over again. You don't fight for peace, you peace for peace. It's real simple. The new epoch is the end of fighting, because fighting is a manifestation of mind. Consciousness does not fight, it just is. And it will not have anyone else telling it what it is and what it will do and won't do. It will do what it knows is right, and not what some control system tells it must do. Mind fights, because mind is the village idiot compared with consciousness.
Great closing remarks, and thank you, David, for a great interview, discussion, talk. Some more talk when you come to Amsterdam, Holland, 27th of November. People, if you are still listening, and I hope you are, please visit www.davidicke.com and go to healingsoundmovement.com if you want to know more about this radio show. This is John Consemulder signing off and thanking David Icke again for a great talk, and I hope to see you soon in the three-dimensional illusionary world, but still in the flesh in Amsterdam. Thank you very much for your time, David.
Cheers, John, and I look forward to seeing you in a few days.
Okay, see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.